The Sino-French War, also known as the Tonkin War and Tonkin War, was a limited conflict fought from August 1884 through April 1885, to decide whether France would supplant China's control of Tonkin. Although the Chinese armies performed better than in other 19th-century foreign wars and the war ended with French defeat on land, the French gained most of the aims they wanted in the Treaty of Tientsin. Prelude. French interest in northern Vietnam dated from the late 18th century, when the political Catholic priest Pignou de Behind recruited French volunteers to fight for Nguyuan and help begin the Nguyuan dynasty, in an attempt to gain privileges for France and for the Roman Catholic Church. France began its colonial campaign in 1858, annexing several southern provinces in 1862 to form the colony of Cochin China. French explorers followed the course of the Red River through northern Vietnam to its source in Yunnan, arousing hopes for a profitable trade route with China that could bypass the treaty ports of the Chinese coastal provinces. The main obstacle to this idea, the Black Flag Army, a well-organized bandit force led by the formidable Liu Yongfu, was levying exorbitant taxes on Red River trade between Sun Tay and Lao Cai on the Yunnan border. In 1873, a small French force commanded by Lieutenant de Vaisseau Francis Garnier, exceeding his instructions, intervened militarily in northern Vietnam. Following a series of French victories against the Vietnamese government called on Liu Yongfu's Black Flags, who defeated Garnier's force beneath the walls of Hanoi. Garnier was killed in this battle, and the French government later disavowed his expedition. Henry Riviere's expedition in Tonkin in 1881. French Commandant Henry Riviere was sent with a small military force to Hanoi to investigate Vietnamese complaints against the activities of French merchants. In defiance of the instructions of his superiors, Riviere stormed the citadel of Hanoi on the 25th of April 1882. Although Riviere subsequently returned the citadel to Vietnamese control, his recourse to force provoked alarm both in Vietnam and in China. The Vietnamese government, unable to confront Riviere with its own ramshackle army, once again enlisted the help of Liu Yongfu, whose well-trained and seasoned Black Flag soldiers would prove a thorn in the side of the French. The Vietnamese also bid for Chinese support. Vietnam had long been a vassal state of China, and China agreed to arm and support the Black Flags, and to covertly oppose French operations in Tonkin. The King Court also sent a strong signal to the French that China would not allow Tonkin to fall under French control. In the summer of 1882, troops of the Chinese Yunnan and Guangxi armies crossed the border into Tonkin, occupying Lang Son, Bac Ninh, Hung Hoa and other towns. The French minister to China, Frédéric Bourret, was so alarmed by the prospect of war with China that in November and December he negotiated a deal with the Chinese statesman Li Hongzhang to divide Tonkin into French and Chinese spheres of influence. Neither of the parties to these negotiations consulted the Vietnamese. Riviere, disgusted at the deal cut by Bourret, decided early in 1883 to force the issue. He had recently been sent a battalion of marine infantry from France, giving him just enough men to venture beyond Hanoi. On the 27th of March 1883, to secure his line of communications from Hanoi to the coast, Riviere captured the citadel of Nam Thin with a force of 520 French soldiers under his personal command. During his absence at Nam Thin, the Black Flags and Vietnamese made an attack on Hanoi, but Chef de Bataillon Berthier de Villers repulsed them in the Battle of Gia Cuc on the 28th of March. Riviere jubilantly reacted. This will forced them to take forward the Tonkin question. Riviere had perfect timing. He had expected to be cashiered for his capture of Tonquin. Instead, he found himself the hero of the hour. There had recently been a change of government in France, and the new administration of Jules Ferry strongly favored colonial expansion. It therefore decided to back Riviere. Ferry and Foreign Minister Paul-Armand Chalamel-Lacour denounced Bouet's agreement with Li Hongzhang and recalled the hapless French minister. They also made it clear to the Chinese that they were determined to place Tonkin under French protection. In April 1883, realizing that the Vietnamese lacked the means of resisting the French effectively, the Chinese civil mandarin Tang Jingsong persuaded Liu Yongfu to take the field against Riviere with the Black Flag Army. This resulted in a year of Liu Yongfu's forces fighting an unconventional war. On the 10th of May 1883, Liu Yongfu challenged the French to battle in a taunting message widely placarded on the walls of Hanoi. On the 19th of May, Riviere confronted the Black Flags in the Battle of Paper Bridge, and the French suffered a disastrous defeat. Riviere's small force attacked a strong Black Flag defensive position near the village of Siuguai, a few miles to the west of Hanoi, known to the French as Paper Bridge. After initial successes, the French were eventually enveloped on both wings. Only with difficulty could they regroup and fall back to Hanoi. Riviere, Berthier de Villers and several other senior officers were killed in this action. French intervention in Tonkin. Riviere's death produced an angry reaction in France. Reinforcements were rushed to Tonkin. A threatened attack by the Black Flags on Hanoi was averted, and the military situation was stabilized. Protectorate over Tonkin. On the 20th of August 1883, Admiral Ame Acute Corbett, who had recently been appointed to the command of the newly formed Tonkin Coast's Naval Division, stormed the forts which guarded the approaches to the Vietnamese capital Hue in the Battle of Tuan An, and forced the Vietnamese government to sign the Treaty of Hue, placing Tonkin under French protection. At the same time, the new commander of the Tonkin Expeditionary Corps, General Bouet, attacked the Black Flag positions on the Day River. Although the French mauled the Black Flag Army in the Battle of Phu Hoi and the Battle of Palin, they were unable to capture all of Liu Yongfu's positions, and in the eyes of the world the battles were tantamount to French defeats. Bouet was widely held to have failed in his mission, and resigned in September 1883. In the event, severe flooding eventually forced Liu Yongfu to abandon the line of the Day River and fall back to the fortified city of Sun Tay, several miles to the west. Confrontation between France and China. The French prepared for a major offensive at the end of the year to annihilate the Black Flags, and tried to persuade China to withdraw its support for Liu Yongfu, while attempting to win the support of the other European powers for the projected offensive. However, negotiations in Shanghai in July 1883 between the French minister Arthur Tricot and Li Hongzhang were terminated by the Qing government on receipt of a naively optimistic assessment by Marquis Zheng Jizhe, the Chinese minister to Paris, that the French government had no stomach for a full-scale war with China. Jules Ferry and the French Foreign Minister Paul-Armand Chalamel-Lacour met a number of times in the summer and autumn of 1883 with Marquis Zheng in Paris, but these parallel diplomatic discussions also proved abortive. The Chinese stood firm, and refused to withdraw substantial garrisons of Chinese regular troops from Sun Tay, Biasin In and Lang Sun, despite the likelihood that they would be shortly engaged in battle against the French. As war with China seemed increasingly likely, the French persuaded the German government to delay the release of Ding Yuan Tian and Zhenyuan, two modern battleships then being constructed in German shipyards for China's Beiyang fleet. Meanwhile, the French consolidated the hold on the delta by establishing posts at Guamyan, Hongyan and Ninbin. The growing tension between France and China gave rise to anti-foreign demonstrations inside China during the autumn of 1883. The most serious incidents took place in Guangdong province, where Europeans were most prominent. Attacks were made on the property of European merchants in Guangzhou and on Shamian Island. Several European powers, including France, sent gunboats to Guangzhou to protect the nationals. Sun Tay and Bac-Ninh. The French accepted that an attack on Lu Yongfu would probably result in an undeclared war with China, but calculated that a quick victory in Tonkin would force the Chinese to accept a fait accompli. Command of the Tonkin Campaign was entrusted to Admiral Corbett, who attacked Sun Tay in December 1883. The Sun Tay campaign was the fiercest campaign the French had yet fought in Tonkin, although the Chinese and Vietnamese contingents at Sun Tay played little part in the defense. Lu Yongfu's Black Flags fought ferociously to hold the city. On the 14th of December the French assaulted the outer defences of Sun Tay at Phu Sa, but were thrown back with heavy casualties. Hoping to exploit Courbet's defeat, Lu Yongfu attacked the French lines the same night, but the Black Flag attack also failed disastrously. After resting his troops on the 15th of December, Corbett again assaulted the defences of Sun Tay on the afternoon of the 16th of December. This time the attack was thoroughly prepared by artillery, and delivered only after the defenders had been worn down. At 5 p.m., a Foreign Legion battalion and a battalion of Marine Fusiliers captured the western gate of Sun Tay and fought their way into the town. Lu Yongfu's garrison withdrew to the citadel, and evacuated Sun Tay under cover of darkness several hours later. Corbett had achieved his objective, but at considerable cost. French casualties at Sun Tay were 83 dead and 320 wounded. The fighting at Sun Tay also took a terrible toll of the Black Flags, and in the opinion of some observers broke them once and for all as a serious fighting force. Lu Yongfu felt that he had been deliberately left to bear the brunt of the fighting by his Chinese and Vietnamese allies, and determined never again to expose his troops so openly. In March 1884 the French renewed their offensive under the command of General Charles Théodore Millet, who took over responsibility for the land campaign from Admiral Corbett after the fall of Sun Tay. Reinforcements from France and the African colonies had now raised the strength of the Tonkin Expeditionary Corps to over 10,000 men, and Millet organized this force into two brigades. The first brigade was commanded by General Louis Brière de Lisle, who had earlier made his reputation as governor of Senegal, and the second brigade was commanded by the charismatic young Foreign Legion General François de Négrier, who had recently quelled a serious Arab rebellion in Algeria. The French target was Bac-Ninh, garrisoned by a strong force of regular Chinese troops of the Guangxi Army. The Bac-Ninh campaign was a walkover for the French. Morale in the Chinese army was low, and Lu Yongfu was careful to keep his experienced Black Flags out of danger. Millet bypassed Chinese defenses to the southwest of Bac-Ninh, and assaulted the city on the 12th of March from the southeast with complete success. The Guangxi army put up a feeble resistance, and the French took the city with ease, capturing large quantities of ammunition and a number of brand-new crop cannon. The Shanghai Accord and the Treaty of Tientsin defeated Bac-Ninh, coming close on the heels of the fall of Sun Tay. strengthened the hand of the moderate element in the Chinese government and temporarily discredited the extremist purist party led by Zhang Zhidong, which was agitating for a full-scale war against France. Further French successes in the spring of 1884, including the capture of Hungho and Taiwan, convinced the Empress Dowager Cixi that China should come to terms, and an accord was reached between France and China in May. The negotiations took place in Tianjin. Li Hongzhang, the leader of the Chinese moderates, represented China, and Captain François-Ernest Fournier, commander of the French Creuse of Volta, represented France. The Tientsin Accord, concluded on the 11th of May 1884, provided for Chinese recognition of the French protectorate over Annam and Tonkin and withdrawal of Chinese troops from Tonkin, in return for a comprehensive treaty that would settle details of trade and commerce between France and China and provide for the demarcation of its disputed border with Vietnam. On the 6th of June the French followed up their accord with China by concluding a fresh treaty of view with the Vietnamese, which established a French protectorate over both Annam and Tonkin and allowed the French to station troops at strategic points in Vietnamese territory and to install residents in the main towns. The signature of the treaty was accompanied by an important symbolic gesture. The seal presented by the Emperor of China several decades earlier to the Vietnamese King Jialong was melted down in the presence of the French and Vietnamese plenipotentiaries, betokening the renunciation by Vietnam of its traditional links with China. Fournier was not a professional diplomat, and the Tientsin Accord contained several loose ends. Crucially, it failed to explicitly state a deadline for the Chinese troop withdrawal from Tonkin. The French asserted that the troop withdrawal was to take place immediately, while the Chinese argued that the withdrawal was contingent upon the conclusion of the comprehensive treaty. In fact, the Chinese stance was an ex post facto rationalization, designed to justify their unwillingness or inability to put the terms of the accord into effect. The accord was extremely unpopular in China and provoked an immediate backlash. The war party called for Li Hongzhang's impeachment, and his political opponents intrigued to have orders sent to the Chinese troops in Tonkin to hold the positions. The Basilia ambush. Li Hongzhang hinted to the French that there might be difficulties in enforcing the accord, but nothing specific was said. The French assumed that the Chinese troops would leave Tonkin as agreed, and made preparations for occupying the border towns of Lang Son, Cao Bieng and at Ke. In early June 1884 a French column under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Alphonse Duguesne advanced to occupy Langson. On the 23rd of June, near the small town of Basilia, the French encountered a strong detachment of the Guangxi army ensconced in a defensive position behind the Songtong River. In view of the diplomatic significance of this discovery, Duguesne should have reported the presence of the Chinese force to Hanoi and waited for further instructions. Instead, he gave the Chinese an ultimatum, and on the refusal to withdraw resumed his advance. The Chinese opened fire on the advancing French, precipitating a two-day battle in which Duguesne's column was encircled and seriously mauled. Duguesne eventually fought his way out of the Chinese encirclement and extricated his small force. When news of the Basilia ambush reached Paris, there was fury at what was perceived as blatant Chinese treachery. Théry's government demanded an apology, an indemnity, and the immediate implementation of the terms of the Tianjin Accord. The Chinese government agreed to negotiate, but refused to apologize or pay any indemnity. The mood in France was against compromise, and although negotiations continued throughout July, Admiral Courbet was ordered to take his squadron to Fuzhou. He was instructed to prepare to attack the Chinese fleet in the harbor and to destroy the Fuzhou Navy Yard. Meanwhile, as a preliminary demonstration of what would follow if the Chinese were recalcitrant, Rear Admiral Sebastian Lespes destroyed 3 Chinese shore batteries in the port of Keelung in northern Formosa by naval bombardment on 5 August. The French put a landing force ashore to occupy Keelung and nearby coal mines at Peitao, as a pledge to be bargained against a Chinese withdrawal from Tonkin, but the arrival of a large Chinese army under the command of the Imperial Commissioner Lu Mingxuan forced it to re-embark on 6 August.